Hey y'all, welcome back to the channel. Today we're in the shop working on the 3B and we're doing brakes. All right y'all, so let me give you a quick walkthrough of the complete brake system I've got laid out for this Jeep. So like I mentioned in past videos, I upgraded the front axle to disc brakes. There's a kit on Brennan's garage. It's some simple bolt-on plates, a couple little spacers, and then you can use geo-tracker rotors and geo-tracker calipers to convert your front Dana 25, Dana 27, Dana 44, works for all of them, into a disc brake axle. So by upgrading to these calipers, these lines need the banjo fittings. So my front brake lines, I want to say these are 86 Honda Accord front brake lines. I'll try and make sure to link all this in the description. There's a lot going on here. So these front brake lines off the Honda Accord are what hook into my geo-tracker calipers. But this is a metric fitting. So this is a M10 125 brake fitting, which everything else on this Jeep, is going to be standard. So I sourced some of these M10 125 3/16 brake line fittings, and they will go on one end of the hard line. And I've got a special brake tool I'm going to show you here in a minute, how we're going to make these custom brake lines to work with our updated braking system. So I've got a couple adapters here. These convert it from 1/4 inch line to 3/16 line. I may or may not need these, I'm not sure yet, but I've got them just in case. The proportioning valve. This is a PV2 proportioning valve, which seems to be a pretty common proportioning valve. This is specifically a GM type. I don't know what the difference is. I think CJ5s and 7s use these too. But it did come with a handy little diagram of what port goes where. These are my two master cylinder ports. This will be my front brake line, my rear brake line, and then this is an optional front brake line port depending on what makes the routing the easiest. But what is tricky about this is no port aside from your front two are the same fitting type. Okay, so moving on down, these are the two hoses that go between your frame and your axles. These are just the stock 3B links, and I hope they work with my lift kit. We're gonna find out. I've got two new T's, the little brass T's that attach to your axles to split. Bought two of those. So next, I've got 1/4 inch brake line, 3/16 brake line, and some other little scraps of 3/16. So first things first, I need to get this proportioning valve mounted somewhere near my master cylinder. I want to go ahead and get the two lines run from the master to the proportioning valve, and then we'll start working on the custom brake lines, splitting off to the front and rear, and we'll get this brake system going. All right, so this is my Eastwood brake tool. It's for making custom double flared brake lines. So it comes with 4 different sets of dies. This is for the 1/4 inch line. So you set your die in there and your brake line, and then you put this clamp down and just kind of snug it, and then you put it on operation 0, and that is what ends up centering up. It's going to zero out everything. So it's got your brake line and your dies zeroed out, and you're going to tighten this down. And then 1/4 inch line, operation 1 for 1/4 inch. Pull this lever. Okay, and then we'll go to operation 2 for 1/4 inch. That's it. Then we loosen this back up. Pull this pin. And it's a perfect double flare brake line. All right, so I got my brake line made up here. Good luck bending this 90-degree right here in front of the bell housing. That is such a tight bend to get in a brake line without kinking it. So this is a 1/2 inch 20, both of these ports on your master. This is a 7/16, and then this is another 1/2 inch 20. So it's kind of strange that the rear and the front, they've got 2 different fitting sizes. Maybe that's to keep you from mixing up your front and rear brake lines coming out of the master. I'm not sure. I'm gonna go ahead and make me some nice sweeps, make up this other brake line for the master, and we'll get everything plumbed into there, and then it'll be just running from our proportioning valve to the back to the rear. So I'm gonna go ahead, get these two brake lines made up, and then we'll be right back. All right, so this is what I've got on the lines running from the master to the proportioning valve. I'm pretty happy with how they turned out. Like I said, this is a super tight bend to get to, and then I just kind of tried to match those two just so they look good. Nice little sweeps over. So I'm gonna start with my rear brake line. It's the longest run. Run me a good piece all the way back here. You know, it's gonna end up, this is where my T goes, that brass T. So that's where I'm gonna start at, and then we'll move up to the front. They'll take a little bit more work than the rears are gonna take, I think. But that's the plan. So I was looking at how the routing to the rear axle was gonna be. So usually, you know, your brake hose is gonna come up into this little cross brace here, and then your brake line runs down the inside of the frame and up under here, and it'll hook in right there. It don't really leave that much slack. I might be better off, you know, building me a little bracket to push it out just a little bit, then I get all that extra slack. Yeah, I was worried about these hoses. These are the factory length, but with my lift kit, I didn't know if it would be enough, and it's probably fine. These springs, they're really not gonna droop down. They're really only gonna compress, so I really don't think I have anything to worry about. I might just leave it the way it is. It was just a thought, you know, just have that little bit extra room. So another perk to having your own brake flaring tool is I can take a whole roll of this brake line, and you can see that run down through there. There's a little hole in that master cylinder bracket for your brake line to go through. Got hooked up right here to the proportioning valve. But I've not had to cut my line to length yet, because as soon as I figure out, you know, where I want to end up at, how I'm going to route this, I can pull it all back out. I'll have the perfect length line, and you know, everything will match right back up. Buying brake line by the roll like this was like 17 bucks for whatever it is, 25 foot of it or whatever. That's a pretty good deal. Okay, so I've got the line from the proportioning valve all the way back here to my brake hose and down to my T. I put one of these hose brackets right here, and then I put one right down here at this where it turns up, and it did a good job of picking the hose up off the frame. I still might put one more, maybe not. And then you want to pay attention to like where I've got this hole now. I want to make sure, you know, this doesn't vibrate up against anything. It doesn't have the potential to get up next to that. Same thing up under here. I got to make sure that going through that hole right there, I don't have an issue with it vibrating, because you'll end up wearing a hole in your brake line. Everything looks real good. Pretty happy with how it turned out. So next, moving on to running to my rear wheel cylinders. Okay, so that wraps up the rear brakes. I really like how they turned out. I think they look good. I might look into some kind of metal zip tie or something to make sure that these lines don't rattle or rub. They're not touching anything. I want to keep it that way. I also don't want them getting snagged on stuff. I might add one more of these saddles along the frame rail just to keep that line in place, keep it from rattling or rubbing. But I'm really happy with how these turned out. You know, brake lines are one of those things that you cut it 3 times, it's still too short. So always leave yourself a little bit of room. It's way easier to trim it or to put a little extra loop in it to get that slack out versus having to restart and waste all that brake line. So now that the rear's done, moving on to the front. So a lot of people don't know what it takes to actually put brake lines back on one of these old Willys Jeeps. You actually have to cut huge chunks of the frame out to put the lines back on. Not really, I'm just kidding. But the reason I cut my bell crank mount off is because, spoiler alert, I'm gonna upgrade to a Saginaw steering conversion. Maybe I didn't have to cut this off, but I was scared it'd get in the way eventually, and then it'd be even harder to get to. So I went ahead and cut it off. I'm sorry, Jeep purist. It hurts me too to cut it off, but I think at the moment, this was the right decision. So running from the proportionate valve up to the front here, it ain't gonna be a real big piece of hard line, but what I'm looking at now is where the hose between the frame and the axle is gonna end up at. And a weird thing is, I can't find any spot on this axle where the hose would have been. I looked at some other axles I have, and there's like, the T is mounted to the axle housing. Also, looking at some pictures online, sometimes there's like a tab over here, it looks like. Mine doesn't have that. I can't, I've looked all over. I can't find a place where this hose would have been. So I'm thinking I'm gonna do something similar to the rear with a tab here and put my T right up here. And then that'll mean putting my hose up on this cross member somehow. I think that'll be the best. I don't want to drill into that housing now because then I'm going to get metal chips down in there, and I'd rather not do that. So that's the plan. I think I'm going to make me a little tab up here and then a little bracket down here, and I should have plenty of flex in this too. Okay, so this is what I came up with. So, like I said, I've got other axles. So I went and off of another Dana 44, I pulled the same bracket like you'll see on the rear, but I did have to, you saw I modified it. I had to move this hole in a little bit. I think it looks really good though. It looks pretty stock. But my next issue is this rubber hose. So I had to decide where it was gonna go to. I ended up putting it into one of the braces that runs up my battery tray. And it's not perfectly straight. I've got this tire off the ground and I still have plenty of bend in my hose. It's not pulled tight. If I move it over straight, see, it's way too tight. I think I can live with it being at just a little bit of an angle. If I can't, I'm going to pull this bracket back off, add material back to it, and move it to these 2 bolts. And then I will for sure have enough room, which is probably what I'm going to end up doing because I'm OCD about this stuff and it bothers me and keeps me awake at night. Also, you may have noticed safety first around here, unless it starts slowing you down, and then you just have to, just make it work. So, believe it or not, I couldn't live with it. I just could not stand for this T to be crooked. You know, that kind of stuff just drives me crazy. So I've got it jacked back up again, tires off the ground, and I've got tons of flex in this hose now. I'm way happier with this. It literally took 10 minutes to take this bracket off and redo it. I extended this side this time, but it looks so good. I've got a vision for this Jeep, and I want things to look good, and this would have just kept me awake at night. So, all right, y'all, so I went ahead, threw my rotor back on and my caliper. I got one of my front brake hoses on. I wanted to give y'all a little closer look of how this disc brake conversion works. So there's that plate I showed in an earlier video. And then these are the spacers, like little 1/4-inch spacers that come with the kit. And I believe this hardware is included in the kit too, Brennan's Garage. Totally worth the money. It saved me a ton of money going with this versus other kits. And then my Geo-Tracker calipers, Geo-Tracker rotors, and then 85, I think, Honda Accord front brake line. So that's what all that looks like. Now I'm gonna throw the tire back on, and I'll show you what I'm thinking with this brake hose. Okay, so here's what I came up with for routing the brake hoses. So I used this factory mount for the Honda Accord, and I clearanced these calipers just a little bit in this slot, so this could bolt up in here and it wouldn't be able to rotate. So I added these little tabs to the axle on both sides. So then I'll just run my hard line over to there and then over to here. I think they look really good. I'm probably going to end up adding some hose guard in these loops right here just to be safe, but you can see there's very little contact with the knuckle, just a little bit right here. So I think this is going to work great. And now I can run those hard lines and we'll have this brake job done. All right, so I've got my supply line coming off my proportioning valve across this cross member, and it feeds in right here. My hose runs down, and then I've got my 2 lines running to both of my wheels. That wraps up the brake job on this Jeep. I'm gonna come back in. I do need to add some of those saddles like here, maybe one in this corner. I've got this one that was already on the Jeep. And then, like I said, I might run back down the frame rail and add one down there. All right, so this wraps up the complete brake system for this Jeep. I'm gonna have to go back, add those saddles, like I said, along the frame rail, maybe up here on this cross member, just keep everything nice and tight, keep things from rattling and keep things from rubbing. I'm also gonna buy some hose guard to put on these front brake lines just in case, you know, it is rubbing a little bit in some spots. So I want to make sure everything's nice and safe. So a lot of people will tell you that in life, you know, it's the journey, it's not the destination. Well, that's just not true with brake lines. I mean, some people might enjoy it. It's never been my favorite job. It's really rewarding when it's done. I mean, I'm really happy with how it looks. I think I'm going to be really happy with the results and the performance. But it's one of those jobs that just drags on and on and on. This is probably 3 weeks on and off, you know, in my spare time working on this project. So now that I've got all these brakes wrapped up, I need to run a fuel line real quick from the tank up to my fuel pump here while I've got the tub off. Then finally, I believe for the last time, the tub is going back on. So in the next video, expect to see that. The tub should be going back on and staying on. That's when some really big things are going to happen. When the tub goes back on, that means we're getting even closer to driving this Jeep. It's been over a year since I started this project. I've never drove it, and I'm really excited about getting to this point in the build. I appreciate y'all checking out my video this week. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see y'all next time.